Perfect timing. Um, Hello, everybody. My name is Carrie Kelso, and we're just going to keep adding people as they come in. But if you want to drop some information in your in the chat of who you are, we have an icebreaker question in a moment. But today we're going to talk about Project Soapbox. So let's start out by finding out who's in the Zoom. So, Ken, you got the slide. So, like I said, my name is Carrie Kelso, and I am a program coordinator for Metro Detroit here in Michigan. And my co-host today is Ken Porter, and I'll let him tell you who he is.
Yeah, I'm Ken. I manage our work in Illinois and in Rochester, New York. I'm one of Carrie's former students too, so it's because of her that I'm here today, many years later. And our fun fact is, oh, that is the fun fact. I read it already. That was my fun fact I had in my head before I even saw it on the slide, Carrie. So, Carrie, did you want anybody else to share a fun fact, or just who are you and where you teach?
We have a icebreaker question on the next slide, so if you want to switch the slide, Ken. So if you can drop in the chat what you teach and where, and then what fictional character you would want to play hooky with if you could. I would play hooky with Pippi Longstocking because she's just brave and jumps out there and does anything. So if I could play hooky, it would be Pippi Longstocking. Ken?
This is gonna sound pretty corny, but maybe Magnum PI had a Ferrari 308 and he was solving crimes. And that's the kind of mood I'm in today. So that's the fictional character I'd like to hang out with.
Oh, Annie, I like yours, Ferris Bueller. It's one of my favorite movies to watch over and over again, especially when I miss in Chicago.
His dad also had a Ferrari too. I'd also hang out with Ferris Bueller.
Huckleberry Finn. So we only have a limited amount of time today, so why don't we get to it? Just so you know, but you already know this because it's being recorded by the MCSS. But if you're not comfortable having your camera off, you have your camera off if you don't want to be recorded. And today's goals, we are going to explore the key practices of Megva Challenges Project Soapbox, reflect on how those practices build community and develop empathy in your classroom with your students, and then talk about how, since everything kind of changed on us last summer, we spent a lot of time reworking all of our curriculum, and we offer it to be both in person and we have virtual lessons, so it can be done both ways. Matter of fact, I just had one of my teachers, third-year teachers at Marygrove here in Detroit, just did his soapbox classroom 2 weeks ago, and he ran it all through Flipgrid, and it worked beautifully. So we will be talking all about that. Through this, we like to model practice as much as possible. This is more of a presentation, so we won't get into as much modeling, but know that if we do, if you ever attend one of our PDs, we do model. We have a workbook that we created for doing this virtually to help do a lot of our lessons in the virtual world, as well as the curriculum in person. And lastly, our shared agreements. Normally in class, this is something that you do with your students. Because we have a limited amount of time, we're just going to throw these up here. Be present, ask clarifying questions if you need to. You can do it in the chat or you come off mute. We like to hear voices. Use the chat to participate. A lively chat is a good chat, and stay curious. Ken, you want to take over? And
yeah, so we work for Megva Challenge. So who are these Megva people? If you don't know, Abner Megva, he worked in all three branches of government. He was a congressman in Illinois, followed by the Chief Justice of the DC Circuit Court. Lastly, he was the White House counsel to President Clinton. I think what's so cool about him and Zoe, his wife, is that they were like true partners. the only reason he ended up in this field in the first place is because he was like, I want to be an accountant. And she was like, I'm not marrying an accountant. So he decided to be an attorney instead. Um, Fast forward, and they wanted to do something to honor their legacy. Many of the young people who get involved in AB's congressional campaigns, and they were going to create an internship on the Hill. And Zoe said, no, that's stupid. There's plenty of those already. Students need to get involved at a much younger age. So let's work with Chicago high school students. And that's how Maker Challenge got started with an elections program where we took students running, campaigning for candidates running for office, and we've since blossomed into Project Soapbox and many other programs that have been running many years at this point. So MIGVA, may be known as a ritual bath, but when we talk about it, it's these two folks here. And one of the big things they believed is that youth are not apathetic. We hear all the time in our society, whenever we see a lack of civic knowledge, people always say, what are they teaching in the schools? How come young people don't care? How come they don't vote? People think that young people aren't engaging and that they're apathetic, but it's just that they're not invited to the table. What we've seen is when we've made honest reach, to provide a seat at the table for young people, they often rise to the occasion. Some young people have been, the system that they've grown up in has shown them that it doesn't care about them. So sometimes it takes multiple invitations to the table. But we think that it's more because youth are uninvited, and many have been invited less than others. So that's one of the main things that we believe in the challenge. And the first step in that to being engaged is using your voice. And there's many ways of doing that. A lot of times people say young people aren't using their voice, but some of them are really active on social media. And that's one way of using your voice. But in the classroom, the first step of doing that, we use Project Soapbox to achieve that first step of using your voice. And young people have already been doing it. They've been engaged in movements all over. And there's plenty of things that they care about. And we start with this question: what is the most pressing issue in your community, and what should be done about it? So it's wide open for them to talk about anything that they want. So, you have students talk about the pothole on the street corner where it's unsafe for at school, or you have students talk about immigration reform and everything in between. So, all very serious topics that our young people bring up to us and show us that they're ready to engage. As I was mentioning, young people are already doing it. I think we saw them really rise up this summer, even during many of them were learning virtually. You saw all these different actions being organized by young people across the country. So young people are already rising up. This is John Boyega, a bunch of young people, even in London, right? And it's all because of what they've done that this is moving across the globe. So we don't believe that they're apathetic. It's just that young people are uninvited. They are already doing plenty.
Okay, so what is Project Soapbox? It brings a lot of things, not just bringing your students up to talk about stuff they care about. It also speaks to their speaking and listening skills. Oh, I'm clicking and just put them up there. Their social and emotional skills, and we'll talk a little bit about that near the end, because we did have some DePaul professors did a research study where they followed the students in Chicago for, I think, 3 or 5 years. And one of the biggest things they saw was the social emotional skills. It gives the students a belief in their own power, making them feel heard and valued as experts is really big. It's something we heard a lot. And it also helps with their persuasive writing. Matter of fact, we have not just social science teachers who do Project Soapbox, we have quite a few English teachers across the country, and some who work in tandem with social science teachers. Another thing to understand is that that's okay, before we hit on this one, is it's important not just to build these skills, but it's good for non-traditional learners. So Soapbox really helps those kids who, the quiet kid that sits in the back that never comes out of their shell, helps them to finally stand up and speak out. I've had experience in the classroom where a student didn't want to participate the entire time, wasn't really participating throughout the school year. But then after 2 days of listening to his peers get up and speak about things they cared about, kind of passed me a note and said, "Hey, Miss Kelso, I have something I want to talk about. Can I get up and talk about it?" And stood up and on the spot gave a 3-minute speech on something he really cared about. So it reaches all of those students, it brings them out. So what makes a good speech? Soapbox speeches are essentially 2 to 3 minute speeches. So it's not that long, where we ask them to talk about, like Ken said, what is something they really care about. It's really important that it's student driven, that the students choose the topic. At the beginning of the curriculum, you have time to talk about what is a community. It can be their physical community where they live, as well as communities that they are part of as teenagers. We have speeches about that only affect youth, or that affect different, might affect American youth, might be world. We have a lot of climate change speeches. I'd like you guys right now to think about what a good speech is. What is an impactful, effective speech that you have heard? Ken, you're going too fast for me. We're going to put you in, I think there's 12 of you, so 3 breakout rooms. And in your breakout room, introduce yourself. We'll give you 5 minutes, and then talk about the speech that you selected and why you selected that speech. What made it great? And then we'll come back. So, Ken, you want to do the breakout rooms?
Yeah. So think about, get that speech in your head while I'm trying to separate these breakout rooms. These aren't our own Zoom accounts, so you're seeing me struggle because of because this is not my account. I am about to send you to a breakout room in a moment. But as you are getting sent there, think of that speech that you think of as impactful. Okay. Jacob, Rachel, and Kellen, did you get a prompt to join a breakout room? Okay. Carrie, I'm moving around. There are a few folks who get
Possible
trapped in.
they stepped away from their desk.
Yeah. Okay. I think I get it worked out. There was somebody in the room by themselves.
Okay, I have a timer set for 5 minutes. Should we just move?
To the waiting room for now.
Okay.
And
Any volunteers, any takers?
We didn't talk about specific speeches all that much. More like what the qualities were in speeches. I mean, a few things were mentioned, but I think we were all afraid of like grabbing that low hanging fruit and trying to come up with something more. But we primarily spent the time talking about the qualities that people exhibit when they're giving speeches.
Okay, great. And as soon as we debrief, Ken's going to go into a little bit about feedback on different speeches. Kate, you were about to take yours off, so what did you have to add to that?
We talked about some very memorable speeches, like I Have a Dream speech and the Gettysburg Address. And then I also mentioned Barack Obama's speeches a lot of times. So we talked about the content of the speeches, kind of inspiring unity or being relevant for long periods of time. And then also the way they're delivered, either feeling very authentic or using kind of rhetorical devices like repetition that make them really memorable.
You hit on some great things there. So inspiration, soapbox speeches are inspirational. In the curriculum, we do have lessons on rhetorical devices. So we do go through and we talk about delivery with the students. And because the students are speaking about something that matters to them in their community, they are very relevant, especially when the students share personal stories. So I am going to, we have lots and lots of speeches that your students can look at, and I'll share links to that in a little bit, but I'm going to turn this over to Ken to talk about how we have the students looking at speeches, not just these famous ones that you guys were talking about, but so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking that we've been doing Soapbox long enough where we have like a bank of speeches that Carrie mentioned that we'll show you in a little bit. But we've moved to having students give feedback in what we call a tag format. So T is it's an affirmation, tell the speaker what they did well. No matter if that student came up there and bombed, I'm sure there was something that they did well. And there's going to be some bombing, especially after you go through your first drafts. Public speaking is a hard thing. A is asking the speaker a question. It lets your speaker know that you were engaging with the content, right? That you were actually listening. And it also kind of helps poke holes in their speech when you're going through the process of writing it. So asking the speaker a question. And then the last is give the speaker feedback. There's always something that could be improved also, no matter how good the speech is. So it's great that everybody's getting all three of these things. You don't have somebody who's just getting fawned over about how great their speech is, and then you don't have students who didn't get a ton of feedback because their speech wasn't so great. So Carrie's letting me know I don't have my screen shared. So let me share my screen. You guys didn't miss much. It was the TAG right here. So we will cover it a little bit more, but first we're going to jump into looking at a speech. So this is a speech given by a Chicago student 2 years ago. And I want us to think about what we were just thinking about, right? What are the qualities of a good speech? See if we can point some of those out in the speech that Revon gives. But then think about the tag feedback, telling them something that he did well, asking the speaker a question, giving the speaker feedback. So then we'll do tag to debrief Rayvon's speech.
My favorite hip hop artist, J. Cole, once said, "There's all sorts of drama from trauma that children see, type of stuff that would normally cause for therapy. But y'all know how it goes down in our communities. We gotta keep it in no matter how hard it could be. Fast forward, we grown and we all smoking weed, and we popping pills due to chronic anxiety. Tell me, my friends, are you comfortable in your skin? Or are you just hurting yourself so you can keep it in?" See, in 2017, it seemed like the media had officially adopted prescription drug abuse as the #1 must to be cool. Hip-hop artist Future's newest song, Mask Off, spent 9 weeks being blared on the radio and had me and all my friends screaming Molly Percocet. See, what we don't know is, according to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the drugs we know as Molly and Percocet fall as numbers 3 and 4 in the top 5 leading opioids to cause overdose in America. See, we never see the trouble we invite in our homes, nor realize the possibility of the matches we entice our children to play with, nor weigh the options of them starting fires that swallow most whole. See, I did it when I was wrestling in 2017. I broke my leg. Dealing with not only this disappointment, but also after the loss of my older brother. So as a grieving sibling, as an injured wrestler, as a disappointed young man, I sat in my room with a bottle full of pills and a body full of pain. The pain I felt wasn't only physical, but also emotional. And it seemed like the more I took, the less I felt and the better off I was until I came down, so I took more than I was supposed to. 90 pills in 10 days. My abuse was right on the brink of addiction. When my parents saw the changes in my actions, when my friends saw the differences in my personality, when my doctor realized how fast my prescription requests were coming in, and I actually got a chance to sit down and talk about my problems. But see, not everybody is as lucky as me. Many fail to be counted as one of the 72,000 to die of opioid overdoses in America alone in 2017. The opioid epidemic, which was already once a large problem, is becoming even larger, and it now is impossible to me to not address it. So I say we start right here, right now. I propose that instead of providing medication to numb the pain, we promote therapy to actually solve the problem and fix the pain. I say we put down pills and we pick up conversations. I say we spend time actually trying to fix this problem, because maybe in 5 minutes we could save 5 lives. Maybe in 10 minutes we could save 20 lives. Maybe we could pull this problem from its root and permanently heal this part of America's wounds, but we'll never know until we try to start this conversation. So I ask you right now, look to your neighbor and say, start the conversation. Look at your other neighbor and say, start the conversation. And look at me and promise that you'll start the conversation. Thank you.
Ken, you're on mute.
Yeah, I pressed the button twice and it didn't unmute. Not my day on Zoom today, unfortunately. I was just saying how great it was. No matter how many times I see Ray Vaughn's speech, I think it's really good. But there's obviously times where he trips up on his words and everything. So do you all have any feedback for Ray Vaughn? Any positive feedback to begin with? Telling him something you thought he did well?
I see where somebody wrote, Mariana wrote in the chat that he was engaging the crowd, sharing about his personal adversity and speaking with passion.
Right? Yeah, he was so passionate. I think what Ray Vaughn had about him, he had kind of like a charisma, which is a big thing. Amazing passion. I love the call to action at the end. Yeah, we're going to talk about call to actions in a minute. His was amazing. His call to action, it wasn't just start the conversation. You know, he went through, it was like a build up to that end note, which I really liked. Made people commit. He made me feel like I was in church, you know, and talking to your neighbor. Ray Vaughn's teacher, I asked her, because she's had a lot of students who've done really amazing speeches, and I asked, and she said that they watch a ton of speeches. They watch a ton of student speeches. So they look at a lot of student speeches and then they kind of make a composite of all the little things that they liked about all these individual speeches they saw to kind of help build out their speech and delivery that they have when they deliver their speech on speech day. And you know, Ray Vaughn, you know, he actually lives in my neighborhood. He's a regular kid, just like anybody else. So we wanted to share that speech with y'all. Showed courage, yeah, that's a big one. We'll talk a little more about that one later. Oftentimes, Project Soapbox speeches are about issues that affect them, right? Personal. So it does take courage to move forward and tell these stories.
Okay, so now, before I start talking about the structure of the speech, I did just drop a link to a YouTube page from last year. We were here in Michigan, we call the our big event the Bonnier Soapbox Challenge after former Congressman David Bonnier, because he was instrumental in bringing soapbox to Michigan. And we were all set to go live at the DIA for our second annual event when 8 days before the event, we got shut down because of COVID. So we had 80 students scheduled to go. With everything that happened with their schools shutting down, we quickly pivoted and we got quite a few of them to submit videos. So the videos that are in that YouTube page are all of our semifinalists that then got sent out to judges to judge. And that's how we'll be doing it this year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But let's talk about the structure of the speech. So every speech has 4 main components. First being the issue. And we talked earlier about that question. What is the most pressing issue in the community and what do you want to do about it? So every speech starts with the issue. Then we also ask the students to, because we don't just want to talk about problems, what would the world look like if that problem didn't exist? What would it be like if there was not an opioid addiction? What would it be like if there weren't potholes? So the second part. Third section is being assets. What tools are already existing that they can get to help work on that issue. And then finally, and this is what really makes it a soapbox speech, is that call to action. What is it you want your audience to do about it? And these can be as simple as stop bullying, as tell a teacher, see if you see it, speak out, to being very specific. I've seen students share actual, pass out little cards and share the email addresses of a congressman because they want them to lobby for a bill, specific bill that has to do with climate change or something. So depending on what the speech is, what is that call to action?
Yeah, and then after they have those things, right, that structure, then we move into the spice, right? And what I loved about Ray Vaughn's speech that it had a ton of spice. He had that opener where he caught his audience with, rapping a song that was popular at the time. I think he had great imagery. His story was really personal. So, all these different things add the spice, right? And after they get the bones, then they start to kind of bring in all those extra bits that really make the speech powerful, right? Make it memorable. So, of course, that structure comes first. And, this is just a short list of some of the things that they can include to spice up that speech. And last but not least, we talked about a little bit about that call to action. Sometimes you'll see speeches where the call to action is, and I want you to stand up to climate change. And it's like, climate change is a massive issue. I don't know where to begin at that. What can I do right now? And Ray Vaughn's speech was excellent. And even though it was a simple call to action, it was one that was very doable. And you didn't leave questioning, what should I do next? Start the conversation. It could be your neighbor. It could be your family. Start this conversation about opioid abuse because it can affect anybody someday. So Ray Vaughn had a really strong one, and being specific, you see students often refer to policy sometime. I've seen speeches about climate issues when students have said, there's a Senate bill on the floor that died last year and we want to revive, email your legislator and tell them to bring up this bill. So the call to action can look many different ways.
Okay, so right now I'm kind of just going to do a quick model of something that we've been doing with virtually in some of our lessons. So if everyone has their cameras off for a moment, so if everyone can turn their cameras off, and then I want you to turn your camera on if public speaking is scary to you, if it is scary to you now, or if it ever has been scary to you in the past. So notice how many of you are flipping your cameras on. And this is a great little thing to do when you're teaching virtually, especially when you have students who don't want to turn their cameras on or not. If you can throw out all different kinds of questions for them, but it'll get your students to turn their cameras on and off. We use it when we have filler time in the beginning and the end with students. So it's a great thing to do. So yeah, we know that public speaking is extremely scary. So how do we get from the scary to what we heard Ravon, how he delivered his speech? And that's really easy. Practice, lots and lots of practice. If any of you have ever been in band, I had a music teacher that this was constantly screamed at us. I remember those little green time cards I had to sign have my parents' initial, and I got really good at forging their signature for turning my time cards for how I was practicing. But in our curriculum, we have a thing called an instant speech challenge. It is silly topics where we ask the students just to speak on something for quickly 30 to 60 seconds. It could be ice cream or school lunches or homework. And while it's one lesson in the curriculum, we find that it works best when teachers do it throughout the curriculum, because it gets them comfortable getting up and speaking. You can even have them giving their own topics. Maybe I was in a classroom in Madison Heights last year, and the students did a little instant speech debate on whether bottled or homemade ranch dressing was better. I didn't know that was a thing that people had comments about, but the students had some really passionate opinions on bottled versus homemade ranch. So there's all different things you can throw out there to have their students do. And then once they've done their speeches and they have their drafts, go back to that tag feedback that Ken showed you earlier, and having the students practice their speeches and give themselves feedback.
Yep.
Is where they get to the point where they're comfortable. And I wish this existed when I was in school, because my first speaking class was my freshman year of college at Eastern Michigan, and it was horrible. I mean, I would have been so much more comfortable. And we have kindergartners doing this now. So it's, imagine if you had been giving public soapbox speeches from the time you were 6 years old, how much more of a confident speaker you'd be as you hit adulthood.
So much more. That's the answer to that.
Yeah,
One
but
of the
I made you do this, remember?
one of the biggest parts about Project Soapbox that I absolutely love is that being an audience member is just as important as being a speaker. Students are coming up and often sharing their personal stories, so we have to talk about how do we be a good audience? How do we receive what our peers are telling us? We've had a few research studies done on Project Soapbox, and what's come out of them is we found that students get just as much out of hearing their peer speech as they do when giving their speech. Being able to feel heard, but then also being able to understand and build empathy for your peers who you may not know that well, especially in a year like this, makes the world of a difference. It helps build those social emotional skills in a time where we really need to. So if students get just as much about being a good audience member as they do a good speaker. So, with listen and learn, the first step is being present, of course. So you're not on your phone, you're not in your email, you're not doing something else. Being present for the speech and actually paying attention. And this is where tag helps, right? If students are giving tag feedback to every speaker, tag is good, is nice enough. It's short enough where they can do it quickly for a bunch of people, and it's a tool that helps keep them engaged. Remembering it's not about you. We often have the tendency to get really excited when a speaker says something that resonates with us, the Me Too effect, right? That happened to me as well. And remembering to, kind of temper that and remember to center the speaker. And you can always talk to the speaker after they're done at the end of your speech day to talk about that shared experience. Watching body language, of course. You don't want somebody who looks like they're asleep or head in their hands or anything like that. You don't like to see that when you're up speaking. So body language is a big piece. Clarifying questions. This kind of goes along with the A of tag feedback. Whenever, and it's so good to do this when you have opportunity to practice, right? Practicing is so important because when we ask those questions, that's when we can make sure we round out our speech and there's no glaring issues with it. And the big one is wild applause. So after every single speech, we don't just clap it up, in person. We always say that security or another teacher needs to be peeking their head into your room to see what's going on. So beating on tables, stomping your feet, making that person feel like, that I don't know, that they just won the lottery or something. So wild applause is a big one. I like to do it virtually. It's a little bit harder virtually, but it's easy. You can coordinate it too. As soon as the speech is over, you can have everybody come off of mute and give wild applause. But there's a few ways to do that we'll cover in a second. And the other is snaps for support. If somebody stumbles in the middle of their speech, snapping it up for them, right? That support system, right? They're just supporting those snaps. Or going back to not interrupting the speaker, snaps are good to let the speaker know that something resonated with you without derailing their speech. So how do you do this virtually? First, of course, if you're using Zoom or a platform that has reaction buttons, the clap or the party buttons are really good for this at the end of the speech. Utilizing the chat box for affirmations is one that I absolutely love because this isn't a thing that you can do in person usually. It's, you students can leave feedback real time about things that resonated with them. And when a student is done, they look at the chat and they see all these comments that were praising them and what they were doing.
And hold on, I just want to interrupt you there a second. This actually worked really well when I just was in the new school in Marygrove in Detroit, because Brandon had all his students submit their speeches on Flipgrid. So when he played the class speeches, the students were actually watching their own speech. So they got to not only watch their own speech, they got to read the affirmations coming through in the chat in real time. That I got Congressman Bonnier to be in the classroom, which right now virtual, it's a lot easier to get partners in the room because he didn't have to get on a plane. I sent him an email the day before and said, hey, here's a link to Microsoft Classroom. Can you be there at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning? And he was. So, they had some people from the school board, and those students were able to read those affirmations in real time because of the virtual effect of it.
It is the most heartwarming part of it, in my opinion. I'm always pleasantly surprised by the things that students say to each other, positive feedback they give to each other. Of course, like I said, coming off of mute and making a bunch of noise. I have like noise makers here in my house, and like balloons, and I have like a purple glittery party hat that I put on when I'm running soapbox competitions. I try to bring some theater to it, because since we're doing it through a screen like we are right now, anything I could do to kind of pump up the moment. And if that's not your jam, you probably have a student that would love to be in charge of celebrating and would do an amazing job at that. So it's also a good opportunity to engage a student who may not always be on task, but who can be really good at hyping everybody up.
Okay, we're can go through a little bit fast downside because we're running out of time.
For sure.
Okay, so a little bit about preparation for the speeches and the type of speeches. Because these are personal, it's really important to maybe be a little prepared before the day of your speeches, for the fact that some of these might be really triggering. So how are you going to respond to them? How will you respond after class? What resources are available, like social workers? I have had students talk about self-cutting. I've had students talk about suicide. My first year here in Michigan, the very first school out of the gate, I was at the school, and 5 classes in a row in one day, more than 50% of the speeches were about mental health. And I needed to go home and drink a bottle of wine after that. It was just, so you need to really think about that. Have Kleenex ready, be able to respond to those speeches. We want to move from the language of trauma to what it is for deficit viewed healing. So make sure that these young people can be connected to their experience and their resilience. You want to make sure that they look at it as politically powerful and not being victims. So
yeah, I think that's such a powerful piece right there, where it may feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened to you, to turning that to like, and look, you're here today talking about it. Like, look how strong you are to be here today. Right, kind of turning those negative things into assets.
So the last thing I want to leave you with, because we only have 6 minutes and I want to give you guys some time, is if you want to participate, what that looks like. So we're going to kind of read that list about what you can do about establishing safety, and we can talk about that later. But here in Michigan, we have 2 big events coming up. We have the On Your Soapbox Challenge, which is April 23rd, but we also have Soapbox Nation, which is in May. If you are in Metro Detroit, you are more than welcome to participate in the On Your Soapbox Challenge. If you are anywhere else in the state, Soapbox Nation is open to you. So it says statewide, but that's actually the Bonnier one, which is the Metro Detroit one. And how that works is I get you the curriculum. You do, it's a 2-week curriculum that you do in your classroom, and then your students give the speeches. Videos need to be submitted to me by the 30th of March to be eligible for the On Your Soapbox. And then the deadline is April 5th for the Soapbox Nation. Then we have a group of civic partners, which are business leaders, politicians, current and former, that get those videos. They go through them with the rubric that's also in the curriculum, and as well as us. And we choose the top 10. Sometimes it's 11 or 12 because we have a very difficult time narrowing that down. And then on April 23rd here, it would be a live event online where those top speakers would then be presenting live. And I believe the Soapbox Nation one, usually they get a trip to DC, but being how it is now, that will also be a live virtual event this year. And hopefully next year they'll be going back to DC with Soapbox Nation and everything will be back live. We've got a few minutes if you guys want to ask questions, and I think the last slide has my email on it. Oh, and we also have a, where is it? Carla will kill me.
I get it.
You have it?
Yep. Yeah, so if you could leave us any feedback if you have time. We know you may be running to another session, but if you have time, we'd appreciate you dropping us any feedback. It's a super short survey. But thank you all so much for choosing this session and spending some time with us, allowing me to stumble through the slide deck. I swear I've done this like 50 times now. I don't know why I was having trouble with the slide deck. But thank you all so much. I'm happy that you all found it helpful and useful. And of course,
A few questions if anyone wants to come off mute before we have to get out of here. If anyone has any questions.
Yeah, we have 3 minutes, and but if you need a break before the next one.
Tone and inclination are good to discuss. Yeah, that's part of the actual formal rubric has part of that delivery in there. And that's a good thing to discuss, definitely.
All right. Well, I'm probably going to go ahead and close this out so the next people have time to jump in.
So real quick before you go out, because Megan's doing the presenting tomorrow because it's her presentation. Should I be the one to log on and share the slide deck and just let her present? What do you think works best? Because I'm meeting with her in the afternoon tomorrow.
Ask her. Some people prefer to work their own slides. I usually prefer to work my own slides. So she may prefer to do that and just have you man breakout rooms or anything like that. So it seems to be person by person. So I'd ask her which would she prefer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it looks like it's easy to make you a co-host. And that once you're a co-host, you have most of the abilities.
okay. Yeah, because she sent me an email. She's like, why are we on their feed? So
Yeah. The one thing you can't do as a co-host is make the breakout rooms. So if you're making breakout rooms, you have to be the host, which means you should log on to the account.
okay, I'll have to look at her slide deck because this is one she put together for Georgia after the election recently. It's the post-election courageous conversations. Remember, this was originally supposed to be live last April, so the second one was supposed to be about elections before the election.
Oh yeah.
But it kind of doesn't work when the election happened in November. So
It already happened. All right, let's hop off so we don't hold anything up.
okay, I'll see you later. Bye. Thanks.